My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you will change the way you see family forever. The funeral for my husband, Arthur, was the quietest day of my entire existence. There, standing beside his freshly dug grave, I received a message from an unknown number that sent a chill straight through my soul. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My hands trembled as I replied, "Who are you?" The response took my breath away. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." In that single moment, my world tore in two. My reality crumbled as I looked up and saw Leo and Thomas, my own two sons, standing beside the casket with strangely calm, almost rehearsed expressions. Something was terribly wrong. Their tears seemed forced, their hugs as cold as the winter air. For 42 years, Arthur had been my partner, my refuge, my very reason for living. I met him when I was just 24 in the small, quiet town of Meadow Creek. We grew up on the same dusty back roads, sharing modest dreams. I worked cleaning houses to support my ailing mother, while Arthur repaired old clocks in a small shop he had inherited from his father. We were poor, but we were happy. We had something that money could never buy. Real, true love. I still remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a crisp Tuesday morning. I was walking toward the market in my faded blue dress and worn-out shoes. He stepped out of his shop, his hands stained with oil, and smiled at me with a shyness that made my heart flutter. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said in a soft, gentle voice. "Do you need me to take a look at your watch?" I didn't even own a watch, but I came up with an excuse just to keep talking to him. That single conversation turned into long walks under the big old oak tree in the town square park, then into whispered promises of eternal love, and finally into a simple, beautiful wedding filled with hope. The first few years were hard. We lived in a tiny two-bedroom house with a tin roof. When it rained, we would set out pots and pans all over the house to catch the leaks, but we were happy. Arthur worked from sunup to sundown in his little shop, and I took in sewing for the women in town. When Leo was born, I thought my heart would burst with happiness. He was a beautiful baby, with his father's big, thoughtful eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Thomas arrived, just as perfect. I raised them with all the love in the world, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. Arthur was a wonderful father. He would take them fishing in the river on Sundays, teach them how to fix things with their hands, and tell them fantastical stories before they went to bed. I fed them, dressed them, and comforted them whenever they cried. We were a close, loving family, or so I had always believed. As they grew up, things began to change. Leo, the oldest, was always ambitious. From a young age, he would ask why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a new car like the other families in town. Thomas followed his lead in everything, as he always had. When Leo turned 18, Arthur offered him a job at the clock shop, but he rejected it with a look of pure contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." Those words hurt Arthur deeply, though he never said it out loud to me. I would see him sitting on the porch at night, staring up at the stars with a profound look of sadness. His son had rejected not only his work, but his entire way of life. The years passed, and to my surprise, Leo managed to make a name for himself in the business world. He got a job at a real estate firm in the city. Thomas followed him soon after. They both started making money, far more than Arthur and I had ever seen in our lives. At first, I was so incredibly proud. My sons had achieved what we never could, escaping a life of poverty and building something better for themselves. But little by little, that joy turned into a quiet sadness. Their visits became less frequent, and their phone calls grew shorter. When they did come, they arrived in expensive cars, dressed in fancy suits, talking about investments and properties. They would look at us with a strange mixture of pity and shame. "Mom," Leo said to me during one of their sporadic visits. "You and Dad should really move somewhere better. This old house is falling apart." He was right, but that house held all of our memories. It was where we had raised our sons, where we had shared thousands of meals, where we had grown old together. It wasn't fancy, but it was our home. Arthur, always so wise, would tell me, "Eleanor, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I resisted believing it. I kept justifying their absences, their brief calls, their broken promises. "They're just busy building their lives," I would tell myself. "Someday, they'll be the loving boys we raised again." But deep in my heart, I knew Arthur was right. We had lost our sons long before I had lost my husband. I just didn't know to what extent we had become complete strangers to them. The most drastic change came when Leo married Isabella, a woman from the city who never bothered to hide her disdain for our simple, humble lifestyle. The first time he brought her to our home, she arrived in high heels that sank into the dirt of our porch and an elegant red dress that looked more expensive than everything I had ever owned in my life. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced, tight smile, barely extending the tips of her fingers to greet me. Her eyes scanned our humble home with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, but that made me feel small. During dinner, Isabella barely touched the food I had prepared with so much love. She moved the roast beef around on her plate and cut tiny pieces of chicken, but she ate almost nothing. Leo seemed nervous, constantly apologizing for things he had never been ashamed of before. "Next time, we'll take them out to a real restaurant," he whispered to Isabella, thinking I couldn't hear him. But I heard him, and every single word pierced my heart like a tiny, sharp knife. Thomas, for his part, remained single but adopted the same distant, cold attitude as his brother. His visits were limited to special occasions, and even then he always seemed to be in a hurry to leave. He was constantly on his phone, closing deals, even during our conversations. "Mom, I have to go," he would always say, long before it was time. "I have an important meeting early tomorrow." Family Sundays became a distant memory. Christmases grew cold and formal. My sons would bring expensive gifts that we didn't need. They would stay for 2 or 3 hours and then leave with an almost visible sense of relief. Arthur and I grew old alone, comforting each other in our quiet life. He continued to work in his shop, though his hands no longer had the same steady strength. I continued with my sewing, but my own eyes weren't the same. We made do with our small, modest income, proud that we never had to ask for anything from our successful sons. "Do you know what the saddest part is, Eleanor?" Arthur said to me one night as we sat drinking coffee on the porch. "It's not that they have money, it's that the money has made them believe that we aren't important anymore." He was right, as he always was. My sons hadn't just changed financially, they had changed in their hearts. We were no longer their beloved parents. We were an uncomfortable, embarrassing reminder of a past they so desperately wanted to forget. Things got worse when Leo bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood in the city. Thomas did the same soon after, investing in a luxury condo that cost $150,000. Suddenly, our sons were the owners of fortunes we couldn't even begin to imagine. "You should sell this house and move into a retirement community," Isabella suggested during one of her rare visits. "There are some very nice places for people your age. You would be much more comfortable." The word community hit me like a slap. A retirement community. After 40 years of building our home, after raising these 2 sons with so much love, they wanted to send us away to a home. "We don't need a home," Arthur replied, with the quiet dignity that always characterized him. "We are fine here in our house." But I saw the expression on Leo and Thomas's faces. They supported Isabella's idea. To them, we were a burden, a problem to be solved in the most convenient way possible. It was then that the more direct suggestions began. Leo arrived one day with papers in his hand, documents he had prepared without ever consulting us. "Dad, Mom," he said, with that fake, polished smile he had perfected. "I have been thinking about your future. This house is worth, at most, $1,000. If you sell it, I can add some money so you can move somewhere better, a better place." To us, there was no place better than the home where we had been happy for so many decades. But Leo didn't understand that. For him, everything came down to numbers, to monetary value. "Besides," he continued, "I think Dad should retire from the shop. He is already 70 years old. It is time for him to rest." Arthur looked at him with an expression of infinite sadness. "Son, working is not a burden for me. It is what keeps me alive. It is what gives meaning to my days." "But you could get hurt," Thomas insisted, backing up his brother as he always did. "At your age, an accident would be very dangerous." Their words sounded caring, but I sensed something more behind them, an impatience, an urgency that I couldn't fully grasp. The following months were tense. My sons increased the pressure for us to sell the house. They brought real estate agents to our home without telling us. They had it appraised without our permission. They even began to talk about what would be best for everyone. "Look," Leo said to us during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, "Isabella and I have decided to have children soon. We will need help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could be an early inheritance." An early inheritance? He was asking for our inheritance while we were still alive. The sheer audacity of the request left me completely speechless. Arthur remained calm, but I saw his jaw tense. "Son, when your mother and I pass away, everything we have will be yours. But while we are alive, our decisions are our own." "Don't be so stubborn," Thomas cut in, with a harshness I had never seen from him before. "You are old now. You can't keep living in the past." That night, after they had left, Arthur and I stayed up talking until dawn. For the first time in our entire marriage, we seriously discussed the possibility that our sons were not the people we thought we had raised. "Something is wrong, Eleanor," my husband said to me, with a look of worry I had never seen in his eyes before. "This isn't just ambition or impatience. There is something much darker behind all of this pressure." I had no idea how profoundly correct his words were. I couldn't imagine that my own sons were planning something that would change our lives forever. I didn't know that the tragedy that was coming wouldn't be an accident of fate, but a cold, calculated conspiracy, carefully orchestrated by the two people I trusted most in the entire world. The last normal conversation I had with Leo was 3 weeks before Arthur's death. He came alone, without Isabella, and he looked more serious than usual. "Mom," he said, sitting at the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast so many times as a little boy, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, Thomas and I will always take care of you." His words soothed me at the time, but now, remembering them, beside Arthur's grave, they sent a shiver down my spine. Why did he say, "no matter what happens"? What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Arthur had left early for his shop, just as he had done every single day for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen, preparing his favorite lunch, roast beef and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang, with an urgency that sent a chill straight through me. "Mrs. Vance?" a voice I didn't recognize asked. "I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words blurred in my mind, like ink in water. The entire world just stopped. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to grab the door frame to keep myself from falling. "What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? Is he in the ICU? Ma'am, please, just come as soon as you can." The trip to the hospital was a hazy, terrifying nightmare. My neighbor, Sarah, had to drive me because I was shaking so much I couldn't even hold my keys. The whole way there, my mind refused to process what was happening. Arthur was so careful, so meticulous in his work. How could something like this have happened? When we got to the hospital, Leo and Thomas were already there. That surprised me because no one had notified them yet, at least, not me. But in my desperation, I didn't pay much attention to that detail. "Mom," Leo said, hugging me with a force that seemed genuine. "Dad is in very bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at his shop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury." Thomas's eyes were red, but something in his expression felt off. He seemed more nervous than sad, like someone waiting for important news rather than someone suffering for his own father. "Can we see him?" I asked, desperate. "Only immediate family, one at a time and for 5 minutes max," the nurse explained. When I entered that ICU room, my heart sank. Arthur was hooked up to a dozen different machines, with bandages covering most of his face and arms. I could barely recognize him. His breathing was labored, artificial, kept going by the machines that beeped constantly. I walked up to his bed and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed to be intact. "Arthur, my love, I am here. Everything is going to be all right. You are going to recover, just like you always do." For a moment, I felt a slight, faint squeeze in my hand. His eyes moved behind his closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to get back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room. Leo and Thomas took turns accompanying me, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors than in comforting their own father. I overheard fragmented conversations that I couldn't fully understand at the time. Thomas was asking about our medical insurance, about the cost of the treatment. Leo was on the phone, talking about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. "Mom," Leo said to me on the second day, "we have reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There is also a workers' comp policy that could cover up to $75,000 more." Why was he talking to me about money when Arthur was still fighting for his life? Why was he so worried about insurance instead of his father's recovery? "I don't care about the money," I responded harshly. "I just want your dad to get better." "Of course, Mom," he said, but I saw something in his eyes that I didn't like. A coldness, a calculator working away while his own father lay there, dying. On the 3rd day, the doctors gave us the most devastating news of my life. Dr. Miller, an older man with a compassionate expression, gathered us in a small office. "Mrs. Vance," he began softly, "your husband's condition is critical. The burns have become infected, and the head trauma is more severe than we initially thought. We have to be realistic about his chances." "What does that mean?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. "It means we need to prepare for the worst. Your husband is in an induced coma. We could keep him alive indefinitely, but his quality of life, well, it is highly unlikely that he will ever regain consciousness." My world fell apart all around me. 42 years of marriage, an entire life built together. And now they were telling me it was all just fading away like smoke. "We want to try everything," I said through my sobs. "No matter the cost, no matter how long it takes." But Leo exchanged a look with Thomas that deeply unsettled me. "Mom," Leo said, in a voice that tried to sound understanding, "we have to be practical. Dad would not want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden on anyone." "A burden?" I exploded with a fury I didn't know I had. "He is your father. He is not a burden. He is the man who raised you, who worked his entire life to give you the best that he could." "We know, Mom," Thomas chimed in, "but we also have to think about you. The medical bills are going to be enormous. They could wipe out all of your savings." Again, the money. Always the money. My husband was dying, and they were busy calculating the costs. That night, alone in the hospital room, I took Arthur's hand and spoke to him as if he could hear me. "My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there is no hope, but I cannot let you go. I cannot imagine my life without you." It was then that something happened that still gives me goosebumps to this day. His fingers moved slightly, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible. His lips moved, as if he were trying to say something, but no sound came out. I called for the nurses, desperate. He's reacting. He is trying to talk. But by the time they arrived, Arthur had returned to his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It does not mean he is conscious. But I knew what I had felt. Arthur had tried to communicate with me. He had fought to tell me something important. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the machine alarms went off. Lights flashed. Nurses rushed to Arthur's room. I was dozing in the hallway when the noise woke me up. "No, no, no!" I screamed, running toward the room. The doctors worked for 40 minutes, trying to resuscitate him, but it was useless. At 4:37 in the morning, Arthur was officially declared dead. The pain I felt in that moment was physical, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. I collapsed by his bed, hugging his still warm body, refusing to accept that he was gone forever. Leo and Thomas arrived at the hospital an hour after their father's death. They seemed prepared, as if they had been expecting the call. They brought papers, documents, and phone numbers for funeral homes. "We have already talked to the Meadow Creek Funeral Home," Leo said to me, while I was still crying inconsolably. "They can pick up the body this morning." "We have also contacted the insurance company," Thomas added. "The claim process is already underway." How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold, just an hour after losing their own father? Something was terribly wrong, but my grief was so intense that I couldn't think clearly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Leo took care of all the arrangements without ever really consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service, as if he wanted to get it all over with as quickly as possible. "It is what Dad would have wanted," he said, when I complained about not being included in the decisions. "Something simple, without a fuss." But Arthur deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and forget. The day of the funeral arrived, cloudy and cold, as if the sky itself were crying for Arthur. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn for my own mother's funeral years ago. My hands were shaking so much that Sarah had to help me button the small buttons on the back. "Be strong, Eleanor," my dear friend whispered as she carefully combed my hair. "Arthur would want to see you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage cannot be buried so easily. Every object in our house reminded me of him. His coffee mug on the table, his tools on the porch, his pillow that still held his familiar scent. When we got to the cemetery, I was surprised by how few people had attended. I had expected to see more of Arthur's co-workers from the shop, more of our neighbors, more acquaintances, but it was only Leo, Thomas, Isabella, Sarah, me, and the pastor. For a man who had lived for 70 years in the same town, who had helped so many people, the funeral seemed strangely empty. "Where are the guys from the shop?" I asked Leo. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he replied quickly. "Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate." But that wasn't true. Arthur had loved his community. He cared about his neighbors. He would have wanted them to come and say goodbye. Why had Leo decided to make everything so secretive, so rushed? During the service, I watched my sons with a strange, emotional detachment. Leo had a solemn expression, appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes constantly darted toward his watch. Thomas seemed restless, as if he had more important things to do. Isabella was discreetly checking her phone behind her black veil. This was how they were saying goodbye to their father, with impatience and distractions. The pastor spoke about eternal life, about a well-deserved rest, about reuniting with God. His words felt hollow in my shattered heart. I didn't want Arthur to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, for us to keep growing old together, for us to keep drinking coffee on the porch every evening. When it was time to throw dirt on the casket, my legs refused to hold me up. Sarah had to support me as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of the dirt hitting the wood was so final, so conclusive, so hopeless. It was at that exact moment, standing by my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. I am alive. That is not me in the casket. My heart stopped. The letters danced in front of my eyes, as if I were hallucinating. I was losing my mind from the grief. With trembling hands, I replied, "Who are you?" The answer came immediately. "I cannot say. They are watching. Do not trust our sons." The phone fell from my hands as if it were burning. Sarah bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages, not until I understood what was happening. "Are you okay, Mom?" Leo asked, approaching me with a worried expression. I stared at him, trying to find some clue, some sign on his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every single expression felt suspicious. "I'm fine," I lied, putting the phone back in my purse. "I just need to go home." On the way back, I couldn't get those messages out of my head. Was it possible that someone was playing a cruel, twisted joke on me at the worst possible moment of my life? Or was there really a possibility that Arthur was alive? But if he was alive, who had we just buried? And if he wasn't alive, who knew enough details about our lives to write something so specific, so chilling, about our own sons? That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a tomb, I reviewed every single detail of the last few days. Arthur's accident had been strange from the very beginning. According to Leo, a machine had exploded in his shop, but Arthur knew every single screw and wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, almost obsessive about safety. Plus, how had my sons gotten to the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know about the accident before I did? And then there was the money. From the very first day, Leo and Thomas had been talking about insurance policies and beneficiaries, as if they had been waiting for this very moment, preparing for it. I decided to check Arthur's papers. In his old wooden desk, he kept all of his important documents in a metal box. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, the shop documents, everything was there. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy that Leo had mentioned, but there was something that I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why had Arthur increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned that change to me, and more importantly, who had suggested that he do it? I kept looking and found something even more disturbing. A workers' comp policy that I didn't even know about, purchased just 2 months before his death. $75,000 in case of an accidental death on the job, $125,000 in total, a fortune for a family like ours. But also, a fortune tempting enough for someone without scruples. My phone vibrated again, another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account, see who has been moving the money. This time I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew far too much to be just a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details that only someone very, very close to us could possibly know. The next day, I went to the bank where Arthur and I had kept our account for 30 years. Mrs. Davis, the manager who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere condolences. "Eleanor, I am so sorry about Arthur. He was such a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. I came to check on our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation." She showed me the bank statements from the last 6 months, and what I saw froze me to the core. Over the past 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Money that I had no idea had been moved. "Who authorized these withdrawals?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your husband came in person," Mrs. Davis explained. "He said he needed the money for some repairs at his shop." But I kept the household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and what we spent. Arthur had never mentioned any expensive repairs at the shop, and we had definitely never talked about withdrawing thousands of dollars from our savings. "Do you have the signatures for these withdrawals?" I asked. She showed me the receipts. And indeed, it looked like Arthur's signature, but something about the handwriting seemed off. It was too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. "Mrs. Davis," I asked, my heart pounding, "did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him?" She thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I believe he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Leo, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Arthur was having trouble reading the documents without his glasses." Leo. My son had been involved in money withdrawals I knew nothing about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Arthur saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I was looking over the bank receipts again and again, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Arthur that he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the evidence that was piling up right in front of me. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Leo's presence in transactions I knew nothing about, his suspicious efficiency in organizing the funeral, his coldness during his own father's agony. But the question that terrified me was, if they had really planned Arthur's death, how had they done it? And who was sending me these messages? How did this person know so much about what had happened? The following days became a living nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every one of Leo's smiles, every one of Thomas's hugs, every word of condolence felt like a mask, hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before I could accept a truth as horrible as the one that was taking shape in my mind. My phone kept receiving messages from the mysterious number. "Go to Arthur's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see." I decided to go to the shop for the first time since the accident. Leo had said that a machine had exploded, but when I got there, I found something completely different from what I had expected. The shop was strangely clean, too clean to have been the scene of an explosion. There were no burn marks on the walls, no debris, no signs of the kind of destruction that such a serious accident should have caused. "Where is the machine that exploded?" I asked out loud. I looked all over the shop and found every single machine in its place, working perfectly. The welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all of them were completely intact. What, then, had been the cause of the accident? In Arthur's desk, I found something that sent a chill straight through me. A note, written in his own handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. "Leo insists that I need more insurance. He says it is for Eleanor, but something does not feel right. I do not trust his intentions." Below that note was another. "Thomas brought me some papers to sign. He says they are to modernize the shop, but I do not understand what it is all about. Why all the hurry?" My husband had had his suspicions. He had intuited the evil intentions of our sons, but he had died before he could tell me. I kept searching and found an envelope, sealed, with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter from Arthur. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means that something has happened to me. In recent months, I have noticed strange changes in Leo and Thomas. They are too interested in our money, in the insurance, in us selling our house. Isabella is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Leo told me that I should be more concerned about my safety, because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I do not know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Eleanor. If something happens to me, do not trust anyone blindly, not even our own sons." The letter fell from my hands. Arthur had sensed his own death. He had seen the signs that I, blinded by a mother's love, had completely ignored. That night, Leo came to visit me. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that now seemed completely fake. "Mom, I have been thinking about your future," he said, pouring himself a glass without even asking if I wanted one. "The insurance money, it is already in process. It will be $125,000. "How do you know the exact amount?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Well, I helped Dad with all the insurance paperwork. He wanted to make sure that you would have enough money to live comfortably." A lie. Arthur had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own note, he had been pressured by Leo. "And what do you think I should do with that money?" I asked, carefully watching his reaction. His eyes lit up with a glint that gave me a chill. "You could buy a smaller, cozier house. Or even better, you could move into a nice retirement community where you would have company and medical care. Thomas and I could manage your money to make it go further." "Manage my money." "We just want to take care of you, Mom. At your age, it is easy to get scammed or to make bad financial decisions. We know about investments, about business. We could triple that amount in just a few years. Triple my money, or make it disappear into their own pockets." "Let me think about it," I said, trying to buy myself some time. "Of course," Isabella said, with her fake sweetness. "But not for too long. For your own good." After they left, I sat in my kitchen, shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. My own sons, my flesh and blood, had not only murdered their own father, but now they were planning to steal everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated, with a message longer than all the others. "Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Arthur's accident. There are contradictions that you need to know about." The next day, I went to the local police station. Sergeant Miller, who had known Arthur for years, greeted me kindly. "The report on your husband's accident?" he asked, with a confused expression. "What accident, Mrs. Vance?" "From his shop, when the machine exploded." The sergeant checked his files and then shook his head. "We do not have any report of an explosion at Arthur's shop here. In fact, we do not have any report of a work accident involving your husband at all." I felt the world sway beneath my feet. But my son said it was an accident at the shop. That is why he was in the hospital." "Mrs. Vance, your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. According to the medical report that I have right here, he arrived unconscious, with all the symptoms of poisoning." Poisoning. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood, a quantity sufficient to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you of this. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been a work accident. Someone had deliberately poisoned my husband. "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" I asked, my voice breaking. The immediate family who signed the hospital papers requested that the information be kept confidential to avoid any unnecessary speculation. They said that you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. The immediate family. Leo and Thomas had hidden the true cause of Arthur's condition, had invented the story of the explosion, and had manipulated everyone, including me, to cover up a murder. "Mrs. Vance," the sergeant continued, "if you suspect the circumstances of your husband's death, we could open a formal investigation." I had more than just suspicions. I was absolutely certain that my own sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, Thomas came to my home with a bouquet of flowers and the same fake smile as Leo. "How are you, Mom? You look tired." "I'm fine," I lied, observing his every gesture from a new, terrifying perspective. "I'm just thinking about the future." "That's good. Leo and I have been talking. We think you should sell the house soon, while it is still fresh on the real estate market." "Why the rush?" "Well, old houses lose their value quickly, and you need the liquidity. Funeral expenses, pending medical bills." More lies. The funeral had been cheap, almost insultingly so, and there were no pending medical bills because the hospital insurance had covered them all. "Thomas," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident." For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of panic in his expression, but he recovered quickly. "What are you talking about?" "Mom? I went to the police station. There is no report of an explosion at your dad's shop." This time, the panic was more evident. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing things like that. They will only confuse you. The grief is getting to you." "Is the grief getting to me, or have you been lying to me?" He got up abruptly, spilling the coffee I had just poured for him. "I think you need to rest. "We will talk when you are calmer." He left quickly, but not before making a phone call from the porch. Although I couldn't hear the words, the tone was urgent and worried. That night, I received the most revealing message yet. "They are coming together tomorrow. They are going to try to convince you that you are crazy, that the grief is making you imagine things. Do not believe them, and do not take anything they offer you to eat or drink." The mysterious message's prediction came true, exactly as it had warned. The next day, Leo and Thomas arrived together at my house, accompanied by Isabella. They had expressions of exaggerated concern and a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. "Mom, we are so worried about you," Leo began, in a sugary, sweet voice. "The neighbors have told us that you have been acting strangely. Sarah says that you have been talking to yourself, that you aren't eating well." Sarah had never said that. It was just another lie in their ever-growing collection. "Isabella brought your favorite pastries," Thomas added, pointing to the bag. "And we made a special coffee from that brand you like so much." I remembered the message's words. Do not take anything they offer you to eat or drink. It was entirely possible that they were planning to poison me too, just as they had done to Arthur. "Thank you, but I have already had my breakfast," I said, keeping my distance. "But Mom," Isabella insisted, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you need to eat properly. You have lost a lot of weight since Arthur died." "I am fine," I repeated firmly. Leo exchanged a significant look with Thomas. It was the same look they had shared at the hospital when the doctor had given us Arthur's prognosis. "Mom," Leo said, sitting down closer to me, "we want to talk to you about something important. Thomas and I have been consulting with some doctors about your recent behavior." "My behavior?" "Yes, the strange questions you have been asking, the visits to the police station, this obsession with irrelevant details about Dad. It is normal after such a great loss, but it can be dangerous if it is not treated." Thomas nodded gravely. "We spoke to Dr. Albright. He says that it is very common for older people to develop paranoia after losing a partner, especially women your age." Paranoia? They were accusing me of being crazy for simply uncovering their lies. "I am not paranoid," I said with all the firmness I could muster. "I am just asking the questions that I should have asked from the very beginning." "What questions?" Leo challenged me. "Like why there is no police report for your father's supposed accident? Like why his shop is perfectly clean if there was an explosion? Like why you withdrew thousands of dollars from our bank account without telling me anything?" The silence that followed was deafening. The three of them exchanged looks of thinly disguised panic. "Mom," Thomas finally said, "those things all have simple explanations. Dad withdrew that money for some repairs he wanted to do in secret as a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "He wanted to remodel the house," Leo lied. "He had hired some workers to fix the roof and to paint the walls. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday." If that were true, where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why did no one in town know anything about this supposed remodeling? "And about the police report," Leo continued. "Not all work accidents require a police report, especially when they happen on private property." More lies. Sergeant Miller had been very clear. Any work accident with serious injuries requires an official report. "Mom," Isabella intervened, with a voice that was sweet but condescending, "we just want to take care of you. That is why we thought it would be best if you moved to a place with specialized medical attention." "A home?" "A specialized care home," Leo corrected. "For people who are going through a complicated grief process. They have psychologists, nurses, activities to keep you busy. And in the meantime," Thomas added, "we can take care of selling the house, managing the insurance money, all of those complicated things that you shouldn't have to handle in your current state." There it was, the complete, horrifying plan. declare me mentally incompetent, put me in a home, and take complete control of all of my money. First, they had murdered Arthur for the insurance money, and now they wanted to steal from me too. And what if I refuse? I asked them. Why would you refuse? Leo asked, with a smile that sent a chill through my entire body. We just want what is best for you. Because this is my house. This is where I built my life with Arthur. This is where I raised you. Mom, Thomas said, with an exaggerated sigh. You can't live in the past forever. Dad is gone. You have to accept it and move on. I have accepted it, but that does not mean that I am going to simply give away my life and my money. The mask of concern began to crack on my sons' faces. Leo got up abruptly. All right. If you will not listen to reason, we will have to take more drastic measures. What does that mean? It means that we can start a legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior. We have testimony from doctors who will confirm that you are suffering from senile paranoia. Doctors? What doctors? I hadn't spoken to any doctors about my mental state. Dr. Albright has already signed a preliminary report, Thomas added. He says that based on our descriptions of your behavior, it is very likely that you need specialized care. A doctor who had never even examined me had signed a report about my mental state, based only on what my own sons had told him. How much had it cost them to buy that false evaluation? So you can cooperate with us voluntarily, Leo continued, or we can do it legally. But either way, you are going to get the help that you need. It was a direct threat. If I didn't hand over my money voluntarily, they would use the legal system to steal it from me. I need time to think about it, I told them, trying to buy myself some more time. Of course, Isabella said, with her false sweetness, but not too much time. For your own good. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. My own sons, the blood of my blood, had not only murdered their own father, but now they were planning to steal everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a message that was longer than all the others. Eleanor, this is a private investigator. Arthur hired me 3 weeks before he died because he was suspicious of Leo and Thomas. They poisoned him with methanol, mixed into his breakfast coffee. I have audio evidence of their conversations, planning everything. Tomorrow, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, go to the corner cafe. Sit at the back table. I will be there. At last, I would finally know who had been sending me all of those messages, and more importantly, I would have the proof I needed to get justice for my husband's death. But I also knew that I didn't have much time. Leo and Thomas had shown their hand. If I didn't act fast, I would end up locked in a home while they spent the money that had cost Arthur his life. The war had begun. And even if I was a 66-year-old woman up against 2 ruthless, greedy men, I had something that they didn't have. I had the truth. And the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to come out. That night, for the first time since Arthur's death, I smiled, because I knew that my husband had not died in vain. His caution, his instinct, his decision to hire a private investigator, all of it was going to allow me to get the justice he deserved. Leo and Thomas had seriously underestimated their mother. They were about to discover that a woman fighting for the memory of her murdered husband is a force more powerful than all of their greed combined. The next day arrived, filled with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. I dressed carefully, choosing my most serious navy blue dress, the one I always wore for important occasions. If I was going to meet the man who could give me the answers I so desperately needed, I wanted to be prepared for any revelation. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I walked toward the corner cafe with steps that were determined but cautious. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every person on the street could have been a spy sent by my sons. The paranoia they had accused me of having was starting to feel completely justified. The cafe was moderately full. I went straight to the back table, just as I had been instructed. I ordered a hot chamomile tea and waited, my hands trembling slightly on the worn wooden table. Exactly at 3 o'clock on the dot, a man in his 50s approached my table. He was tall and gray-haired, with intelligent eyes and an expression that was serious but kind. He was carrying a brown folder under his arm. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked in a low voice. I nodded, not yet trusting my own voice to speak. "I am Michael. I am so sorry for your loss. Arthur was a good man." He sat down across from me and placed the folder on the table. "Before I show you what I have, I need you to know that what you are about to hear and see is going to be very, very painful. Are you ready?" "I have been getting ready since I received your very first message," I replied, with a firmness I didn't even know I possessed. Michael opened the folder and took out a small voice recorder. "Arthur came to see me a month ago. He was very worried about his son's behavior. He hired me to investigate them discreetly." He pressed the play button. Arthur's voice, so familiar and so dear, filled the small space between us. "Michael, I need you to know that if something happens to me, it will not be an accident. Leo and Thomas have been pressuring me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, Leo brought me some papers he said were to better protect Eleanor. But when I read them, I realized that there were also clauses that directly benefited them." My heart sped up. Hearing Arthur's voice was like having him back with me for just a few precious minutes, but his words only confirmed my worst suspicions. The recording continued. "Thomas has been asking me strange questions about my daily routine. What I eat for breakfast, what time I leave the house, if Eleanor ever comes to the shop with me. He says it is out of concern, but something about the way he asks these questions worries me." Michael paused the recording. "This conversation was from 3 weeks before his death, but I have something much more recent." He played another recording, this time with Leo's voice in the background, talking on the phone. "No, we cannot wait any longer. The old man is starting to get suspicious. Yesterday, he asked me why I was so interested in his insurance. Yes, I already have the methanol. It works perfectly, because the symptoms look just like a heart attack or a stroke. No, Mom will not be a problem. After Dad dies, she will be so devastated that we can do whatever we want with her." Tears began to roll down my cheeks. It was the voice of my son, my own son, coldly planning his father's murder. "There is more," Michael said softly. "This recording is from the day before Arthur's death." A new recording began, this time with Thomas talking to someone. "Everything is ready. Tomorrow, Leo is going to put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it was a special vitamin supplement that a doctor recommended. The old fool is going to drink it without suspecting a thing. The symptoms: it will start with dizziness and confusion, then loss of sight, convulsions, and then a coma. The doctors will think it is a stroke or a heart attack. By the time they realize it is poisoning, it will be too late." My world completely collapsed. Not only had they planned Arthur's murder, but they had executed it with a coldness that absolutely terrified me. How was it possible that my own sons, the babies I had nursed, the little boys I had comforted through their nightmares, were capable of something so monstrous? "How did you get these recordings?" I asked through my sobs. "Arthur had asked me to put listening devices in your house," Michael explained. "He was afraid, but he didn't know exactly what he was afraid of. We placed them on your home phone and in a few other strategic spots." He took out a series of photographs from the folder. "I also have this. Leo, buying methanol at a hardware store 30 miles out of town. He paid with cash and used a fake name, but I have it all on video." The photographs clearly showed Leo leaving a hardware store with a small bottle in his hands. The date on the photos was from 5 days before Arthur's death. "And this," Michael continued, showing me more documents. "These are Leo and Thomas's financial records from the last 6 months. They have been spending a lot more money than their incomes would justify. Leo owes $70,000 to a lender in the city. Thomas has gambling debts for over $40,000. They were desperate." It all started to make sense. It wasn't just greed that had motivated Arthur's murder. It was sheer financial desperation. My sons were completely ruined, and they saw their own father as a source of easy, fast money. "Why didn't you go to the police immediately after Arthur's death?" I asked him. "Because Leo and Thomas are very smart. They bribed the doctor who attended to Arthur at the hospital to change the official diagnosis. Instead of poisoning, the death certificate says heart failure due to complications from a work accident. Without that medical evidence, my recordings might not have been enough for a conviction. But now we have all of the evidence together," I said, feeling a mixture of deep pain and a growing determination. "Exactly. And there is one more thing you need to know." My blood ran cold. "What?" "Your sons were planning to kill you too." Michael played one last, final recording, this time with both Leo and Thomas's voices together. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too," Leo said. "We can't risk her getting suspicious, or anyone else putting ideas into her head." "How?" Thomas asked. "The same way as with Dad, but this time we can make it look like a suicide from her depression. A widow who just can't live without her husband. Nobody would ever question it. And with the money, we are her only heirs. Everything would be ours. The house, all the savings, the insurance money, almost $200,000 in total." The recording stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. My own sons had not only murdered their father, but they were also planning to murder me as well. All for money. "Mrs. Vance," Michael said gently, "I know this is devastating, but we have more than enough evidence now to make them pay for what they did." "What do we do now?" I asked, wiping away my tears. "First, we need to go to the police with all of this evidence. Sergeant Miller is an honest man. He is not involved in any of the corruption. Second, we need to act fast. Your sons are planning to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow. If they succeed, it will be much, much harder to proceed legally." "Tomorrow?" "Yes, I intercepted a phone conversation this morning. They are meeting with Judge Anderson at 10 o'clock in the morning to start the mental incapacitation process." I got up from the table with a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. "Then we have to act tonight." "Exactly," Michael confirmed. "But first, there is one more thing I want to show you." He took one last photograph out of the folder. In it, Arthur was leaving a medical clinic that I didn't recognize. 3 days before he died, your husband went to get a full medical exam at a clinic in the city. The results show that he was in perfect health. There were no signs of any heart disease. His blood pressure was normal. Everything was perfect. This definitively proves that his death was caused by poisoning, not by any natural health problems. That was the final piece of evidence we needed. Arthur had been a perfectly healthy man, murdered by his own 2 sons. "Michael," I said, taking his hand, "thank you for keeping your promise to my husband. Now, let's go get him some justice." That same night, Michael and I went directly to the police station. Sergeant Miller was working the night shift that week, which was perfect for our purposes. When we arrived, it was 8 o'clock in the evening, and the station was relatively quiet. "Sergeant Miller," I said, in a firm, clear voice, "I need to file a formal complaint for the murder of my husband, Arthur Vance." The sergeant looked at me with surprise. "Murder, Mrs. Vance? The death certificate says that he died from heart complications after a work accident." "The death certificate is false," I replied, placing Michael's folder on his desk. "My husband was deliberately poisoned with methanol by our own 2 sons." For the next 2 hours, Michael and I presented all of the evidence: the audio recordings, the photographs of Leo buying the methanol, the bank documents showing the unauthorized withdrawals, Arthur's medical results proving his perfect health, and finally, the recorded conversations where my sons had confessed to both their father's murder and their plans to kill me. Sergeant Miller listened to each recording with an increasingly serious expression. When we had finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head in disbelief. This is monstrous," he murmured. "Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this, Mrs. Vance? Once we arrest your sons, there is no turning back." "Sergeant," I replied, with all the dignity I could muster, "those men murdered my husband in cold blood, all for money. They were planning to murder me, too. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals who must pay for their crimes." "We will need the medical examiner to exhume Arthur's body to confirm the presence of methanol," the sergeant explained. "Are you prepared for that?" "Do whatever is necessary," I replied, without a moment's hesitation. Sergeant Miller immediately called the district attorney. Despite the late hour, the seriousness of the case led the DA to come to the station personally. After reviewing all of the evidence, he immediately authorized the arrest warrants for both Leo and Thomas. "We will proceed at dawn," the DA explained to us. "We need to make sure we have all of the evidence before they have a chance to destroy any additional proof." Michael walked me home that night. "Are you sure you will be okay alone?" he asked, with concern in his voice. "I will be fine," I replied. "After everything that I have discovered, I am no longer afraid. I have justice on my side." I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up, sitting in my kitchen, looking at the photographs of Arthur that we had on the walls. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel only pain. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and deep satisfaction, knowing that justice for his murder was finally coming soon. At 6 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang. It was Leo. "Mom, you need to come to Thomas's house right away. Something terrible has happened." "What happened?" I asked, feigning concern. "It is better if I explain it to you in person. Please, just come quickly." I knew it was a trap. After hearing the recordings the night before, I knew they were planning to move up their plans to get rid of me. But I also knew that the police were already on their way to arrest them. "I am on my way," I lied. Instead of going to Thomas's house, I stayed right there in my kitchen, waiting. At 7:30 in the morning, I saw from my window as several police cars headed toward my son's houses in different directions. My phone rang repeatedly for the next hour. First Leo, then Thomas, both with increasingly desperate voices asking where I was, but I didn't answer any of their calls. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Sergeant Miller knocked on my door. "Mrs. Vance, we have arrested Leo and Thomas. They are both in police custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." I felt my legs tremble, but this time it was not from fear. It was from a profound sense of relief. "How did they react?" I asked. "Leo denied everything at first, but when we played the recordings for him, he completely collapsed. Thomas tried to escape through the back window of his house. We had to chase him for 6 blocks. That afternoon, Isabella came to see me. She arrived sobbing, pleading, a completely different person from the cold, calculating woman I had always known. "Mrs. Vance, please, you have to drop the charges against Leo. He is not a bad person. He was just desperate because of his debts. This is my fault too. I pressured him a lot to find some money." I looked at her without a single trace of compassion. "Isabella, your husband poisoned my husband. He was planning to murder me too. There is no explanation or justification for that." "But we are family!" she screamed in desperation. "Think about what this is going to do to the family." "The family died the day you all decided to kill Arthur for money," I replied coldly. "Now please, leave my house." 3 days later, the exhumation of Arthur's body was carried out. The lab results confirmed exactly what Michael had discovered: lethal levels of methanol in his system, enough to cause all the symptoms he had experienced before his death. The case became a sensation throughout the entire town. No one could believe that 2 sons had murdered their own father, all for money. The local newspapers called it the cruelest crime of the decade. Over the following weeks, more details came to light during the investigation. Leo really did owe $70,000 to illegal lenders who had started threatening him with violence. Thomas had lost $50,000 in underground gambling dens and was also facing serious threats. They had seen Arthur's life insurance money as their only salvation. but their greed had led them to increase the policies so dramatically that it had aroused their own father's suspicion. We also discovered that the doctor who had falsified the death certificate had received $5,000 in cash from Leo. He was also arrested for obstruction of justice and falsifying official documents. Michael explained all the details of the plan that Arthur had made with him. "Your husband was much smarter than his sons ever believed. He knew that something bad was coming, but he didn't know exactly what. He hired me not only to investigate Leo and Thomas, but also to protect you if something ever happened to him." "Did he know that they were going to kill him?" I asked. "Not exactly," Michael said, "but he suspected that his life was in danger. That is why we installed the recording devices. That is why we documented everything. He wanted to make sure that if something ever happened to him, the truth would eventually come to light." My Arthur, even in his final days, had been protecting me. He had anticipated our son's betrayal and had taken all the necessary steps to ensure that justice would prevail. The trial was scheduled to begin in 2 months. Both Leo and Thomas were facing charges of first-degree murder, which, in our state, carried a sentence of 25 years to life. The day of the trial arrived after 2 long months of intense legal preparation. The courtroom was completely full. Reporters from several regional newspapers had come to cover what was already known as the case of the killer sons. The whole town was there. Neighbors, former co-workers of Arthur, even people I barely knew, but who wanted to witness this historic moment of justice. I wore my best black dress, the same one I had worn for our wedding so many years ago, but which now represented both mourning and a newfound dignity. Michael accompanied me, sitting by my side throughout the entire process. His presence gave me the strength to face what would be the most difficult day of my life. Leo and Thomas entered the courtroom in handcuffs, dressed in orange prison jumpsuits. Seeing my sons like that broke my heart one more time, but I no longer felt any pity for them. I only felt a deep, profound sadness for the moral death they had chosen long before they had physically murdered their own father. The prosecutor presented the case with a devastating precision. One by one, the recordings were played for the court. The silence in the room was absolute every time the voices of Leo and Thomas were heard, coldly planning Arthur's murder. When the prosecutor played the recording where they had planned to kill me, too, several people in the audience gasped in horror. One elderly woman got up and left the courtroom crying. I couldn't blame her. It was difficult to process such a level of cruelty. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said during his opening statement, "this is not an ordinary case of family greed. This is a case of cold and calculated premeditation, where 2 men decided to murder the very father who had raised them with love and sacrifice, simply because they needed money to pay off their gambling debts and irresponsible loans." Leo and Thomas's lawyers tried to present a defense based on desperate circumstances and external influences, but the evidence was simply overwhelming. The recordings didn't lie. The bank documents didn't lie. The forensic evidence of the methanol in Arthur's body didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with legs that were trembling, but with a mind that was crystal clear. I had been waiting for this very moment for months. "Mrs. Vance," the prosecutor asked me, "can you tell us what your relationship was like with your sons before your husband's murder?" "I thought I had a good relationship with them," I replied, looking directly at Leo and Thomas. "I raised them with all the love I had. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father worked from sunup to sundown to give them the best that we could. I never imagined that that same love and sacrifice would one day become the reason for his murder." "At any point, did you ever suspect that they could harm your husband?" "No. And that is the most painful part of all of this. I trusted them completely. When they told me that Arthur had had an accident at his shop, I believed them. When they organized the funeral so quickly, I thought they were just being efficient in their grief. I never, ever imagined that they were covering up a murder." Leo lowered his head during my testimony. Thomas looked at me defiantly, but I saw tears welling up in his eyes. Too late for tears. Too late for any regret. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecutor decided to play the full recording of the conversation where they had planned my own murder. Leo's voice filled the entire courtroom. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too. We can't risk her getting suspicious." A murmur of horror swept through the audience. Several people turned to look at me, with expressions of both disbelief and deep compassion. "How did you feel when you heard this recording for the first time?" the prosecutor asked me. "I realized that I had lost my 2 sons long before I had ever lost my husband," I replied, my voice cracking but firm. "The babies that I had nursed, the children that I had comforted in their nightmares, they had died and had been replaced by 2 strangers capable of any cruelty, all for money." The defense tried to cross-examine me, suggesting that maybe I had misinterpreted my son's intentions, that maybe the grief had made me exaggerate the evidence, but the recordings spoke for themselves. Michael also testified, explaining in detail how Arthur had hired him because he was so afraid of his own sons. He described every single step of the investigation, every piece of evidence that had been collected, every recorded moment that had finally revealed the truth. The medical examiner presented the results of the exhumation, confirming the lethal presence of methanol in Arthur's body. He explained how this particular poison acts slowly, causing exactly the symptoms my husband had experienced before he died. After 3 long days of devastating testimony, the closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor was crushing. "Leo and Thomas Vance are not victims of their circumstances. They are predators who saw their own parents as financial obstacles that had to be eliminated. They planned, executed, and covered up Arthur's murder, and they were planning to do the exact same thing to Eleanor. They do not deserve compassion. They deserve justice." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. I could hear the beating of my own heart as the judge read the verdict. "In the case of the state versus Leo Vance and Thomas Vance, on the charge of first-degree murder of Arthur Vance, we find the defendants guilty." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Leo completely collapsed in his chair, finally comprehending the sheer magnitude of what he had done. Thomas remained rigid, staring straight ahead with no expression at all. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Eleanor Vance, we find the defendants guilty." The judge proceeded immediately to the sentencing. "Leo Vance and Thomas Vance, for the premeditated murder of your own father and the conspiracy to murder your mother, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. When I heard those words, I felt a gigantic weight lift from my shoulders. Justice. Finally, there was justice for Arthur. After the trial, many people came up to me to hug me and express their support. Sarah cried with me, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of relief. "Eleanor, Arthur can finally rest in peace now," she whispered to me. That night, I returned to my house, which now felt different. It was no longer a place of pain and betrayal. It was my home again, the place where Arthur and I had been so happy for 42 years. Michael came to visit me a week after the trial. "How do you feel?" he asked me. "At peace," I answered honestly. "For the first time since Arthur's death, I can finally sleep soundly. I know that he is resting because his death did not go unpunished. And the money? The insurance? The savings? I have donated the life insurance money to a foundation for victims of family crimes," I explained. "That money was stained with blood. I could never have used it. My own personal savings are more than enough for me to live modestly for the rest of my days." 6 months after the trial, I received a letter in the prison mail. It was from Leo. "Mom, I know that I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret everything. The money, the debts, the desperation. They blinded us. We lost all of our humanity. Thomas and I destroyed the most loving family in the world, all for $125,000 that we never even got to enjoy. Tomorrow, I will end my life in my cell. I cannot live with what we have done. Take care, Mom. Tell Dad that we are so sorry. We were such bad sons. I didn't arrive in time to prevent his suicide. Leo was found hanging in his cell the very next day. Thomas, upon learning of his brother's death, suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the prison's psychiatric hospital. Today, 2 years after that trial, I live peacefully in my small house. I have converted Arthur's old shop into a beautiful garden where I grow flowers to take to his grave every Sunday. Michael has become a close friend, visiting me regularly to make sure that I'm okay. Sometimes the neighbors ask me if I miss my sons, and the answer is complicated. I miss the children they once were, but those children died long before Arthur ever did. The men they became were not my sons. They were strangers who happened to share my blood, but not my heart. I have learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and a deep, mutual respect. Arthur was my true family for 42 years. The friends who supported me during that terrible trial are my family now. Justice did not bring Arthur back, but it did give me peace. And on quiet nights when I sit on the porch where we so often drank coffee together, I swear I can feel his presence. So proud of me for being strong enough to do the right thing, even when it meant losing my sons forever. 5 years have passed since that terrible day in the cemetery when I received the first message that changed my life forever. Today, I am 71 years old, and my completely white hair reflects all the storms I have faced and overcome. But my eyes, as my dear friend Sarah tells me, now shine with a peace they didn't have before. The house where Arthur and I built our dreams is still my refuge. I have made some small improvements with the money I had saved. I painted the walls a soft, warm yellow, Arthur's favorite color, and I have turned his old shop into the most beautiful garden in the entire neighborhood. Red roses, white carnations, and sunflowers that always seem to seek the sun, just as he taught me to do during our most difficult years. Michael became more than just the investigator who helped me get justice. He became my chosen family. He comes to visit me every Wednesday afternoon, and we drink coffee on the porch while he tells me stories about his other cases. He sometimes asks me if I regret reporting my own sons, if it wouldn't have been better to just keep the secret and live with the lie. Never, I always answer. The truth hurts, but lies kill the very soul. The foundation I established with the life insurance money has become something so much bigger than I ever could have imagined. The Arthur Vance Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes now helps dozens of families every year who have gone through tragedies so similar to my own. We have psychologists, lawyers, and private investigators, all working so that no other family has to suffer in silence what I had to suffer. 6 months ago, a 40-year-old woman came to see me. Her name was Maria, and she suspected that her own brother had murdered her mother for the inheritance. Her story was painfully similar to mine. Greedy relatives, pressure to sell, properties, strange, suspicious behavior after the death. The foundation provided her with a private investigator, free legal advice, and psychological support throughout the entire process. When her brother was convicted of murder 3 months later, Maria came to hug me, crying, "Mrs. Vance, you saved my life. If you hadn't had the courage to report your own sons, I never would have had the courage to report mine." Those are the moments that remind me why all the pain I went through was worth it. Thomas is still alive, though he is no longer the same man I once knew. After Leo's suicide, his mind completely broke. The doctors say that he lives in a constant state of guilt and deep paranoia, believing that Arthur comes to visit him every single night to scold him for the murder. He has tried to end his own life 3 times, but the prison guards now keep him under constant surveillance. I still receive letters from him occasionally. They are incoherent, filled with desperate apologies and pleas for my forgiveness. At first I would read them, looking for some small trace of the son I had raised with so much love, but then I realized that reading those letters only reopened wounds that had already started to heal. Now I just keep them, unopened, in a small shoebox. Maybe someday I will read them. Maybe not. I have the right to protect my own peace of mind. Isabella disappeared from town immediately after the trial. Someone told me that she had moved to the city and had changed her name. I don't blame her. Carrying the last name of a murderer must not be easy. Sometimes I still wonder if she knew what Leo was planning, if she was a silent accomplice to Arthur's murder. But those questions all belong to the past, and I have learned to live in the present. The town of Meadow Creek will never forget this case. It has become a local legend, a cautionary story that parents now tell their own children as a warning about the dangers of greed and betrayal. Some people see me as a hero. Others see me as a cruel woman who sent her own sons to prison. I don't care what they think. I know the truth, and the truth has given me the peace I so desperately needed. My health remains surprisingly good for my age. The doctor says it is because I was finally able to free myself from all the stress and the sadness I had been carrying for so long. The body heals when the heart finally finds its peace, he explained to me during my last checkup. Sunday mornings are my favorite. I cut fresh flowers from my garden and walk to the cemetery to visit Arthur's grave. His headstone now has an inscription that I had engraved after the trial. Arthur Vance, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death. I tell him everything that has happened during the week. I talk to him about the foundation, about all the families we have helped, about the thank you letters I receive from people who have finally found justice, thanks to our story. And I swear I can feel his approval in the wind that moves the leaves of the nearby trees. "Do you know what is strangest, my love?" I said during my last visit. "I no longer feel any pain when I think of Leo and Thomas. I only feel pity. Pity because they had all the love in the world, and they chose to have hate. They had a family that adored them, and they chose betrayal. They had the opportunity to be honorable men, just like you, and they chose to be murderers." Last week, a reporter from the city came to interview me for a documentary about family crimes. She asked me if there was anything I wanted to say to other people who might be going through similar situations. "Family is not an excuse for a crime," I replied. "Love is not blind. Love with boundaries is true love. If someone who says they love you is capable of harming you for money or for their own convenience, that person does not really love you, and it is never, ever too late to seek justice, no matter who the culprit is." This year, on the 5th anniversary of Arthur's death, I organized a special ceremony in his memory. More than 200 people came: neighbors, members of the foundation, families we have helped, and local authorities. It was beautiful to see how his death, which had begun as a terrible tragedy, had now become a force for good in so many people's lives. Michael gave an emotional speech. "Arthur Vance died because of his son's greed, but his legacy lives on in every single family that finds justice, thanks to his wife's incredible courage. Evil tried to destroy his story, but good has turned it into a story of hope for others." At night, before I go to sleep, I sometimes take out the old photographs from when Leo and Thomas were just children. I see them playing in the yard, hugging their father, laughing with me on past Christmases. I allow myself to cry for those innocent children who once existed before greed had completely corrupted them. But I no longer cry for the men they became. Those men chose their own destiny. My story ended up being bigger than my own personal tragedy. It has become a symbol that justice is possible, even when it comes from the most unexpected of sources. A 66-year-old widow proved that the truth is always more powerful than lies, that true love is always stronger than betrayal, and that it is never, ever too late to do the right thing. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and Michael will come for coffee, as he always does. I will make his favorite pastry and tell him about the thank you letters that arrived this week. Afterward, we will work together in the garden, planting new flowers for the spring. Life goes on, more simple, but so much more authentic than before. I have learned that true family is not about shared blood, but about shared values, mutual respect, and a love that never, ever turns into harm. Arthur, wherever you are, I hope you know that I kept the promise I made to you. By your grave on that terrible day, I found the truth, I sought justice, and I turned our pain into a story of hope for others. Your death was not in vain, my love. What did you think of this story? And from which city are you listening? Let's meet in the comments. I read every single one, and I love hearing from you. If you like this story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing you more stories, just like this one. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I am so looking forward to your comments on this story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There is so much more on my channel. Please don't forget to subscribe. I will see you in the next life story with so much love and respect.